Hey everyone, welcome to Sociastrology. Today we're going to talk about Mars transiting through Scorpio. So, in traditional astrology, Scorpio is one of the signs that Mars rules, so it is very strong in this place, and it should be a very distinctive type of transit that we'll be experiencing, and it's making some really fascinating alignments while it's in this place. So, we're going to look at the dates. We will look at those alignments that it's going to make, and then we will look at this from a collective perspective, how we can all utilize this. We'll look at this from a global perspective, and then finally, we will take this through sign by sign and look at where this is going to be taking place in your own personal chart. So, Mars is going to be in Scorpio from the 22nd of September of 2026 through to the 4th of November. And we can see here some of the energies that Mars and Scorpio itself brings. So determined, focused efforts, potentially obsessive willpower, really desiring to take meaningful action, diligence, vigilance, intensity of passion, protectiveness, privacy, things like this, wanting to work in private. But we're going to get into all of that in a moment. I want to actually first look at this as Mars moving through a fixed water sign and the alignments that are going to be playing into this, because those are going to be amplifying this energy quite a bit. It's a very unique transit. This isn't our usual Mars going through Scorpio kind of a transit. So let's look at the alignments that it's making, and then we'll get into really teasing out the interpretation further. From the moment, really from a little bit before Mars actually enters Scorpio, because of the fact that we have the eclipse that's taking place on the 21st, Mars is moving into a square with Pluto. And this is quite tense, but those first several days of Mars moving into Scorpio, this is going to be a really strong influence. This is the one we don't like quite as much. Best, I guess, that we get this one out of the way. We then come into some really fascinating and very helpful alignments. But this one is going to be quite tense. It is very conflict oriented. These two, when they are in a square to each other, that is a Mars-like aspect between them that itself indicates conflict between two things that are reactive to each other, that feel a need to respond to each other. And when we're dealing with Mars, especially Mars in Scorpio, it is going to want to go directly after that. And yet Pluto in Aquarius is going to be very cunning about how it responds to that square. So this can be, in the world especially, not so great, as we're going to see. Now, in our own lives, there is, again, that tense conflict. This does bring up issues of control and anger. So both of these placements can resort to anger more quickly than we would like. They can carry that energy, and they're both in fixed signs, which means that anger and control issues, power issues that crop up under this influence can really stick with us. So that is something that I would caution about with this, is to try to just control our own energy, emotionally regulate ourselves, and try not to be controlling others, basically. It's also very explosive in a literal sense. So we may see that in the world. We may see that on the news, unfortunately. But it can also be explosive as there's something under the surface, Pluto. There's that thing under the surface that we've been feeling that is a frustration, or it's something that's uncomfortable. It's something that we know needs to change, but we may be a bit resistant to it. As that Mars comes through and squares it, that can kind of explode outward. So really consider things that you're sweeping under the rug. If they get triggered during this period of time, which is much more likely that they would, that can just burst forth. So very much worth keeping that in mind as well. This also brings up those power dynamics and willpower. Both of these are going to try and control the other. And so domination, violence definitely is a part of that power dynamic picture. It's likely that these kinds of energies are all going to be wrapped into the same kinds of things. So those reactions, they'll be about power dynamics. They'll be about, I am trying to exert my will in this way, and I'm taking issue with this thing outside of me that I feel is trying to control me or trying to prevent me from doing XYZ. I think if we look at the world right now, we can see those kinds of energies. And in fact, the most recent really big news story that was very upsetting on a lot of different fronts and kind of scary in the States. This square, like I said, it's building. It's under the surface right now. And because we're getting into eclipse season, this square is already pretty active. But once it gets exact in those signs, it might kick off a little bit more again. So this is also really quite underhanded and secretive when these two get into a square. So this can be covert activities. This can be working in secret together. There are big time institutional power aspects to Pluto. This is the type of power that is beyond the normal. So internally, this can be those moments where we just reach into a deep well and we can see, okay, not only can I transform myself, regenerate myself, rise from the ashes, but that level of power, which we don't usually exercise or have in our normal lives, also that in the world. So governments, banks, big corporations, institutions, militaries, those kinds of powers, also the spying institutions. Potentially we have some information about that because this is that working in secret, that kind of covert activity, kind of a energy to these things as well. So there can be some definitely underhanded activity going on during this period right off the bat here. But this is also really passionate and in all different kinds of directions. So there could even be information coming out about seedy, untoward behavior. Pluto can bring revelations even. So this could be something that we're actively seeing or that we're hearing about that's coming out. So yeah, that square, I would not at all underestimate it. It's also something that I've been mentioning when we had the repeated oppositions between Mars and Pluto. We kept seeing issues crop up, which we were expecting based on the election for the US. That took place under an almost exact opposition between Mars and Pluto. And what we saw when that came back again, because Mars went retrograde, we did see splits, fissures within the movement that wound up winning. And I was expecting when we got another square that would happen again. And I think we're seeing a bit of that again now. So that could speak directly to that mega movement and fissures and push and pull basically within that as well. So we then get a more quiet Mars for a little while. We can focus finally. It moves on from that square and Mercury is catching up with it. So it's moving ahead and they will be co-present for a while, but then finally Mercury will exactly conjoin Mars at 19 degrees of Scorpio on the 20th of October. So notice that's almost a full month later. So this sharpens the heck out of the mind, especially in Scorpio. Really sharpened thoughts, very emotional, passionate, potentially even argumentative or angry language or utilization of information and knowledge in that way. So exchange, like very angry exchanges, arguments, fights, yelling, screaming, things like that can definitely be a big part of this. And we might see some of that. Also, very fixed mind, very fixed opinions that people are very defensive about, possibly even aggressive with pushing on others and so forth. So really making up one's mind and refusal to change one's mind. And that can be quite negative. So this can skew toward negative thinking. But for most of us, aside from a little bit more negativity than we could probably all do with, I do think that a lot of us are going to have a little bit more fears, a little bit more negativity, just a tad more than usual. But for people who are focused on emotional regulation and who are just kind of normal people, this shouldn't be too much of a terrible thing. This should actually cause us to become really fixed, not just on a fixed opinion, but fixing our minds on something. This is going to be very solutions oriented. It's going to want to understand exactly how to act and then have the motivation to mentally and physically stay on task. So very passionate as well, also bringing a lot of genuine motivation and genuine interest in what it is that you're thinking about and doing, setting your mind and your energy on. And it's also in Scorpio, we're also building into some of the other transits that we're going to see here in a moment that are nice. But if you are a creative type, if you are an intuitive type, if you are a spiritual type, this is really helpful for developing, working up those energies and creating something of them. So mind and body being on the same page, knowing how to purge what is a potential irritant or a potential problem. So any sort of habits, challenges, negative thoughts about oneself or even other people, bringing those to the surface so that they can be purged and worked through either creatively, spiritually, psychologically, emotionally. So this is highly, highly, highly productive. I like this conjunction on a personal level. On a global level, we're going to look at it as its own kind of a thing. But yeah, for most just regular of us people that don't do crazy things when we're triggered in certain ways, I think that this is actually going to be intensely productive and really, really helpful to get our action and our thoughts on the same page there. Now, what is super lovely, at this point, Mercury is moving on, so it's kind of cleared this, but it was building. That aspect that I'm about to show you, it was building with Mercury. Mercury did this Grand Trine, which we're going to talk about that a lot here shortly. I'm going to do a whole video about this specific trine between these two heavy hitters here. Next, I believe that'll be the following week after I publish this. And then I'm also going to talk about the fact that we have a crazy amount of grand trines, which are these blue full-on triangles where we have all three parts of it that are building up there. We're not only getting Mars through this area and that Mercury, which scoots out ahead, we're also getting Mercury going retrograde, creating this grand trine again, retrograde, creating it going direct. We're also getting the sun in this place, creating this grand trine. We're getting Venus through this place, creating this grand trine, all in this autumn in the northern hemisphere, spring in the southern hemisphere period of time. I love this a lot. So this with Mars is also so fascinating because what we're dealing with here is Jupiter, which is order. It is beneficial, big picture thinking. So knowledge, foresight. It's generally quite fortunate. It's also exalted in Cancer, which we discussed in a recent video. So it's in a quite strong position here. Mars is in its own sign. Jupiter is in its sign of exaltation. And then Saturn is in Jupiter's sign. So that is quite helpful. This can speak to matters of judiciousness, of governance, of civility, of how to make things work, how to make things better, how to improve on things, how to create a sense of well-being and comfort, broadly speaking. Saturn has to do with long-term plans, responsibility, accountability, putting in good, clean effort. It can become the punisher when it sees something that is really out of hand, when it sees something that is deeply untoward. It can also bring a bit of a very serious, somber kind of an energy to equations as well. But Saturn keeps the really long-term plans. Jupiter is saying, okay, how do we then improve upon that even? How do we make that bigger and better? How do we make that even more sustainable? How do we make sure that between these two, the growth that we're going after, that we really want to see, is realistic and realizable? And then let's do that. And Mars is that real motivation to, okay, let's do that. We have the game plan. We know what it is that we're working on improving here. So let's act upon that. I really love this Grand Trine. So very functional, excellent for getting yourself on a lot of different intermediate levels. These are the three planets that are just beyond Earth. So we're dealing with Mars and then Jupiter and then Saturn. This is that beyond the day-to-day kind of energy that we're dealing with. This is how do we push things forward? So excellent effort to have that trine between Mars and Saturn, the focus of Mars, the plan of Saturn, the optimism of Jupiter coming into this. So it makes it incredibly functional. Also great for passion and drive. Reaching down to Jupiter, that side of it, that Jupiter is going to be offering rewards for the passion, the drive, the energy, the effort that Mars is making here. And so this winds up building into a sense of really productive creativity. These are in water signs. So these tend to be very intuitive, very spiritual, very creative, emotional, etheric, even signs. So an ability to be really productive and sustainably productive, creatively, intuitively, spiritually. This also offers an incredible motivation, momentum toward goals, clarity of action, a sense of there being a clarity of here's the long-term goal, here's the action I'm taking, and I can directly see where the reward is in the effort that I'm putting toward my goals. And I think that that's something that we've all been low-key very frustrated about, is that we're needing to push toward better futures for ourselves and things like that. We're putting in the effort, we're putting in the energy, we're trying to be good and everything like that. And we're not necessarily seeing that these things are going to be possible. They will. We recently, last year, we were dealing with squares between Jupiter and Saturn. We were dealing with the oppositions between Mars and Pluto. Much more frustrating energy, an energy that stops things in its track, that separates plans from energy and action. This is really tying them all together in a way that is incredibly helpful, matching rewards with effort. So taking that direct action, seeing the order in our circumstances and situations again. This is also going to be highly motivating in the water signs toward seeking comfort, seeking security, seeking a sense of fulfillment, of wholeness, of well-being, of being able to be comfortable, to relax, to not overthink things, to have a sense of faith that things are working out as well, to have a sense of belonging and connection with others as well. Now, one thing with this, I'm going to harp on this a bit here. This is a double-edged sword, but there is this really strong desire to believe, and a desire to believe in what you are doing, which can be great. That can be an even more motivational kind of factor to be utilizing here. But if the basis of belief is faulty, that Mars and Scorpio is not necessarily going to be quick to question it and to adjust. So it really is up to us to make sure that we are being rational and reasonable in our beliefs, that we're checking those in different kinds of ways. And it may feel like things are going so well at this point that we don't really want to poke that bear and question what it is that we're doing, because it seems like it's working. But that desire to believe and that deriving of motivation from belief that things are going well, that things are moving forward, could have the type of underbelly that we're not wanting necessarily to scratch at. So I will be completely direct with this. Saturn can put a bit of a dampening effect on empathy when it's in Pisces. It can be very focused on trying to create boundaries between things that Pisces doesn't really draw boundaries between all different kinds of people, different places. It's all really the same thing to Pisces, you know. But when Saturn's in that place, it's going to try to draw those lines. It's going to try to create a sense of order and categorization, basically, between those things. Jupiter in Cancer can be wonderfully empathetic. It can be very nurturing. It can really love the well-being of all people and be very full of goodwill toward all. but it can also be kind of protective, such that it can even become tribalistic and go a bit too far in that direction of protecting, quote unquote, one's own. Mars in Scorpio itself can even be a bit paranoid and take actions based on fear and try to, again, draw those lines between what's a threat and what's not. So I think that it's kind of clear what I'm getting at here, which we're going to go into in a moment, but there's very little holding back, a negative kind of protectionism here as well. So that is the only caveat that I would throw into this trine. And that hopefully will respond a bit better to the other planets that are also coming through this area. So finally, I want to point out on the 4th of November, immediately before Mars goes into Sagittarius and leaves Scorpio, it will be exactly trine then to Neptune as well. Now, yes, this is kind of playing into the Grand Trine, but the trine between Jupiter and Saturn throughout this period of time, to me, it stands alone because of how close it is. That they're within a degree of each other for weeks, several weeks. And so it really seems to point to something specific between those two. This is a few degrees off, but it is still a player in that situation. But this trine in and of itself will also blend into that Grand Trine, and then the period of time after that. Again, that creativity, the imagination, that belief-inspired action. Now, this also can bring in those aspects that I was saying about weird fears, perceiving threats, like bad information, fear-based beliefs can come into play when we're getting that trine between Mars and Scorpio and then Neptune in Pisces from some people who are inclined toward that kind of a thing. And then, yeah, taking action on that. But for most of us, this is going to be incredibly creatively productive, very inspiring. If you're a writer, if you're a creative type of any sort, I would be utilizing this to put some ideas into form, basically. If you are not, but you are a major music lover or a movie lover or something like that, engaging your imagination, going into that place of just the joy of creativity, the joy of intuition, I would say go into that place through this period of time, because it's likely to be very, very fruitful. So let's go ahead and look at the collective people level interpretation of this. Again, what we're dealing with is very determined, focused efforts when Mars is in Scorpio. Mars is our energy. It is our drive. It is, in a sense, our ego of this is who I am, and I see something out there that isn't quite yet a part of me, but I would like for it to be. So I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get it. So that kind of motivation, that kick-starting energy. And that can go, of course, in many different ways. This can also be our assertiveness, which in extremes can turn into anger and things like this. Mars is what we're really willing to fight for as well. It can be very courageous and bring a lot of fortitude to bear on any given situation. Willpower, really, I guess is the word that I'm looking for there. In Scorpio, it's extra focused. So Scorpio is that fixed water. So it's going to feel out a specific thing that it's wanting, and it's going to go after that until it gets it. It can be very obsessive. There can be some murky fears and things like that come in with Scorpio. It does tend, no offense to Scorpio friends out there, it does tend more negative than other signs. And so with Mars there can be that intense protectiveness against perceived threats. Sometimes they're very real, and Scorpio can see them before they happen, and sometimes they're not entirely necessary. And that focus of Scorpio is also very, very passionate. It's very vigilant. It's very sharp and to the point. It is also, again, as a water sign, very creative, spiritualized, strong instincts here. So when Mars is in Scorpio, this being one of its domiciles, it's in that fixed nocturnal water sign of Scorpio. It can definitely work behind the scenes in a very determined fashion. It can become emotionally motivated and tireless due to, again, belief and emotional investment in something. So that determination, that focus is really helpful here. But again, obsessiveness, obsessing over a topic, even wanting to know everything about it and put a bunch of energy into understanding it, especially when Mercury joins in here. But we can also then get that really strong, focused, long-term willpower as well. Desiring to take meaningful action. So wanting for there to be a sense of feeling behind the action that's taken or behind the goal that the action is taken toward. Also very diligent. So hyper aware of things that are going on under the surface, but sometimes the imagination can get out ahead and it can become very vigilant about concerns and matters and negative things that aren't necessarily going to be realized. So it's a double-edged sword between that diligence and vigilance. So Mars is also our passions. It in itself, Mars is pretty emotional. That's kind of the energy that it's working on, is that passion. So really intensifying that passion in this place and intensifying the emotional load that passion is carrying as well. So like I was saying, potential emotional outbursts of people in general that are around, of us or of people that we are crossing paths with or people that we hear about, doing things out of a sense of overwhelming emotional feeling about something that just kind of bursts forth. Now, one thing that's good about Scorpio that most of us can use is that willpower that it carries. It does also carry it over itself. So it can be cool-headed. It can be cool and calculating and sharp and focus again on that long-term goal and feel its feelings, sweep away those feelings and get back to the point. But one thing that can also wind up happening there is that when it sweeps those feelings away, they don't really go away. They wind up festering. And so that's where we can sometimes get those outbursts in places like this. So also very protective, very privacy oriented, quite secretive. And that is that defensiveness, that wanting to create a protective wall around the emotions, around creative output, around what one really cares about, wanting for that to be protected from any negative or harmful outside influences. And again, that can go a bit overboard. So on the collective level, coming back to this square with Pluto, again, really intense power dynamics, strong willpower that we can direct and should direct. I hope that we all will be trying our hardest to make sure that we are directing our willpower during that period of time. But again, can be some underhanded actions. And the conflict of wills that we see with this on a collective level, they might not be completely out in the open. So this can just be things that you know are going on in the power dynamics, but it doesn't have to be this big national news kind of a thing when we're just dealing with this as people. But yeah, passion's really overflowing. One thing I would say about this is try your best not to get in the way of goals of other people under this kind of an influence. And then, yeah, let's talk about this Grand Trine on a collective level as well. So during this period of time, as we start to move into October, there's a real dynamic focus on long-term strategy, long-term goals and plans, especially around creativity, spirituality, comfort, satisfaction, or enrichment of your life. That's what this is really excellent at, because it's in these water signs that we're working with here. Making what truly matters to us, big picture, a major priority here. But again, keeping in mind that there is a bit of a risk of a loss of sense of reality and proportion within one's own subjective perspective or within one's own emotions. So try not to lose yourself in that sense of belief or emotional attachment to either specific outcomes or identities, groups, your family, things like this. Try not to lose your sense of proportion and perspective within that. This is actually quite helpful for emotional healing and working through emotion, which is interesting because Saturn's going to point out the faults in the emotionality that Mars is bringing to the table here gently. Jupiter's going to want to improve upon that And Mars being out in Scorpio will be willing to purge and purify. It might not be willing to necessarily change its mind about certain things or change its course on certain things. But if it sees a problem, it will be willing to really purge that. So this is really helpful to that too. And yeah, there's this real desire to believe, but there's this desire to believe and act upon what feels good subjectively. So that's why I was saying when it comes to tribalism and things like that, that's where this can go a little bit awry. But this can also be a real desire to believe in the goodness of humanity, or a real desire to believe in the deservingness of one's own creativity, or a desire to believe in spiritual order or something like this, and then acting in accordance with that. So how sound is the basis of that belief on which you're pinning all of this? That's difficult to tease out, but that is going to have a lot of bearing on how that winds up going. This is also really wonderful for creating a sense of accountability around those more difficult aspects, though. So around the tribalism and things like this, around any sort of violence or exploitation with the Mars-Saturn connection here. So when it comes to what we've seen of that in the world, this bringing a sense of a lot of accountability around that as well, just as much as it will reinforce that in some things. This is one of the frustrating aspects of astrology. It's working on those energies. So it will both increase that in some people, but it will also bring, with Saturn and Jupiter here, some sense of accountability to all of the Mars, Scorpio energies, events, and things like that, that kind of underhanded potential action and things like that. Those which need to be controlled, which need accountability. These two also have access to bring some accountability to that. But what I love about this really is that there's just so much less friction to prevent an intention from becoming reality. So to prevent that intention of creating a specific result from becoming that specific result. So there's much less that's in the way here, which I really love. One thing I will say, though, and this doesn't necessarily just have to be on like a governmental level or whatnot, though it could be, is there can be big problems of water. So too much water, or conflict around water, or unsafe water. We do have both of the malefics in water signs, and then we have them connected to Jupiter. Usually Jupiter makes things better, but it can also make things bigger. So when it comes to bacteria in water or things like this, problems in water can get out of hand with this because there's nothing stopping it. That's the thing, is that with these trines, there's not a stop sign in it. So that's one aspect there. So I wouldn't necessarily ignore any sort of water issues that you are encountering, like in your home or anything like that. There's much less to like hold back a leak from getting worse during this period of time. And yeah, there can be conflict as well around water. And I'm not sure how that would happen outside of governments, but maybe this is fighting over water rights or something along those lines. So between cities, between communities, things like this. I mean, I'm thinking about that whole water talk thing, where I think that a bunch of people were doing stuff with their water and people were saying this isn't water anymore. Even conflict like that, I could see taking place under this. But also then attempts to control emotion. So emotional appeal is really strong with this. That's so huge with this influence. And so we can see that attempts to control emotion or attempts to appeal to an emotional response, trying to create a specific kind of an emotional response. So we may see this in popular media more, just as much as we see it in the news or propaganda or things like that, or even with the people that we're dealing with. If you know someone who uses emotional appeal in order to create a certain outcome or a certain result, for better, for worse, if it's for a charity or something like that, just as much as if it's for personal gain, that is heightened under this Grand Trine as well. So with all of that said, positive signs, basically how to make the best of this, what to embrace here, directed long-term action and plans, focusing in on that, you're definitely able to push your way through in ways that we haven't quite been, where we've been running into walls. Those walls are basically coming down around this time, which is great. Also, fostering a sense of belief in what you're doing. Again, the emotional appeal is strong. So utilizing that for good things, utilizing that maybe to foster a sense of unity or connection with people around you, emotional understanding and things like this. This is also really helpful for the sustainable expenditure of energy. So not over exerting yourself, not overburdening yourself, but rather having the energy to get done what you need to. And because maybe you're not getting as distracted, or you're not getting as thrown off course, or you're not stressing out about all the walls that you feel like you're running into, that energy, that productive energy, being able to be much more sustainable. Also super great for fostering an ability to create a sense of comfort and security for yourself. That's also going to be a major motivational factor here, so I would lean into that. Spiritual practice is really supported by this, developing your intuition, your instincts as well, for creative productivity or productive creativity. So if you are an artist or a creative type, I would be utilizing this too. This can also really help to enrich your life over time. So to set in motion certain practices that you can run with that really are focused on enriching your life with these in water signs. But again, keeping in mind that this can also fuel protectionism, and I hate to say it, but even like hate-based movements, things like that. I hate to say that, but just kind of keeping that in mind, that is a thing that is going to be around. So what to avoid for best results here: over subjectivity, over emotionality. Again, that unfounded belief as basis of action, I think, is going to be the biggest hindrance here. Because this is going to allow us to do what it is that we believe in. But if our belief is faulty, it's not necessarily going to protect us when we're dealing with Saturn as well, and Jupiter for that matter, and a Jupiter-ruled Saturn no less. It's not necessarily going to protect us from the fallout of the fact that we desired so much to believe in something that wasn't true. So we may think that we're making a lot of progress and then wind up having something basically wind up coming undone because the basis of understanding, the basis of belief was fundamentally faulty. I think that would need to be pretty extreme for that to wind up taking place, but I'm sure that we're going to wind up seeing that with some people. Also, obsessiveness is something to try to avoid, or at least be aware of. Sometimes it can be nice. Sometimes that can even help with focus when we're studying things or when we're trying to really understand something and not get distracted. That kind of obsessiveness can be helpful. But if it's obsessiveness over things that others should potentially also have a say in, but we are getting over obsessed about a specific outcome or result that also impacts others, things like that can become a bit difficult. Addiction can also become a bit of a problem. Again, we're dealing with Mars, malefic in Scorpio. We're dealing with Saturn, malefic in Pisces. And then we have those in a trine to Jupiter, which can improve things, sure, but it can also make things bigger in Cancer there. So between the three, that desiring to believe things that feel good, also desiring to do things that feel good. So addiction is potentially a problem here, as well as hedonism, really giving into the senses and things like this. Fighting, I would really try your best to avoid it. It's probably going to be a little bit more difficult to do so, but at least if you can keep a cool head about any sort of disagreements, that should help a lot. And manipulation. We're dealing with Jupiter and Saturn on the back end of this. There will be accountability for what this Mars is doing. It's just that it might not hit right away. This is the kind of thing where it's like Jupiter and Saturn could definitely give Mars enough rope to hang itself, basically. So people who are engaging in heavy manipulation around this period of time, I would expect that there's going to be accountability and consequences for that later on. Not worth it. Even though it's probably very persuasive And I want to just word this a little bit differently just to make myself really, really clear. Willpower over self-control. That is great. That is helped here. That line will not necessarily be drawn by everyone. And it's when we start to get into matters of power over others and control over others that I think we start to really get into some trouble and where there's a risk with this. So stay in your own lane, basically, I guess is what I'm saying about that. And then if other people cross into your lane, just try and keep a cool head and address it. Let's go ahead and talk about this globally. What to expect. So there's not much preventing nationalism-based war or violence here. Things getting out of hand. Frustrating to me because it's such a beautiful alignment for all of us to be utilizing, but I don't see much preventing that from kicking off around this point. Now, again, we're dealing with astrology here. We're working with those energies. So the interesting thing is that where that has already been done, and even down the line, we can see accountability for those things, but there's not going to be a wall in the way of that during this period of time. So that's the kind of fine line distinction that I'm trying and hopefully clearly drawing there. Strategic planning and action during this period of time. So things being more clear, weirdly enough. We're going to talk about this when we talk about the Jupiter-Saturn trine in and of itself. Things are likely going to become weirdly more clear in the coming few months. I know that that sounds outlandish, but I'm just reading the astrology right now. There's something that's functional. There's something that's making sense. There's something that's clear. We know more so where it is that we're heading in the coming couple of months. And then that trine is going to go into the fire signs and we're going to have it well into 2027. So there's something that's working, weirdly enough. I know that it sounds outlandish right now, but I trust that we're going to see that coming in. So yeah, strategic planning and action, no longer just like a governance feeling like it's just flailing about, basically. Also, though, strategic conflict and war planning being a major thing here. So I'm not thrilled about that. And we may see something kick off, literally. And it's likely that it would be shrewd and calculating and, you know, all of those kinds of like covert actions and all that strat military stuff. Secret operations, things like that maybe we see the outcome of it, but was kind of out of left field, like really shrewd, smart stuff. So action also playing out according to plans. Hopefully also economic development. That's something you tend to expect with a trine between Jupiter and Saturn, and then especially when it comes to Mars coming around, and then we'll also talk shortly about the Sun and Venus and Mercury coming around to this area and lighting that up with a Grand Trine. The astrology would indicate to me that there's some economic development. My brain and perception of the world right now is saying that there's no way. So what I will say here and satisfy both of those aspects of myself is that there's economic clarity. Again, there's greater clarity of what is the direction and what are the choices that we need to make in order to shore ourselves up long term, regardless of what it is that we're dealing with. So it's that clarity of sight and that ability to plan finally. But yeah, again, action according to plan. So being able to move forward, being able to create a sense of order to follow. Effective policing. And I don't just mean that in a great way. Policing for good or bad will be very effective under this Mars and Scorpio period of time, but especially as it's coming into that Grand Trine by aspect. Like I said, conflict on or around water, blockades, issues of national waters, territorial enforcement as well, shipping lanes becoming an issue, trade controls becoming an issue, potentially that I assume could speak to secondary tariffs or sanctions, things like this. So trying to control those factors. The water signs have actually a lot to do with trade and shipping and things like this. Could also be, we could even think of this as like emotional warfare. I know that we tend to think of that as like information war, but like I was saying, the emotional appeal being so strong here, there's like this moralizing aspect, or this like kind of like that if you're either with us or against us kind of a thing. But I would imagine that it's going to be so much more like laden and soaking in emotional appeal and emotional manipulation, on all different sides. So yeah, like I said, more clarity of action, less stagnancy as well of response when those three are in the Grand Trine, at least, even with the square to Pluto and everything. So yeah, less stagnant period of time. And this is also going to speak strongly to the strength of some coalitions, especially where those national interests wind up converging, or they feel that there's some emotional tie between different countries. So this could be some kind of an identity. Yeah, sorry, I should have moved ahead. More clarity of action, less stagnancy, all of that. So in order to best foster a sense of community and understanding with this transit of Mars through Scorpio and the alignments it's going to be making, focus on the emotional well-being of yourself and others. Charitable action under this influence should actually also be really effective. So that emotional appeal, but also getting people on board to take care of each other. So also organizing collective action to address common frustration. So the fact that we all have a lot of the same kinds of frustrations, really coalescing, coming together, creating a kind of collective or common understanding of that. Contact representatives en masse, basically. Make your voice clear. Say what you need to say. This can also be really helpful to creative endeavors if you are trying to foster that understanding and community. So creative campaigns, messaging, things like this, or bringing people together in a creative way that might not need to be so cut and dry. This is a global action that we're taking or anything, but getting people together, again, creating that sense of belonging and community with the water sign Grand Trines that are coming up. That's going to be incredibly helpful. So yeah, mobilization, discussing the importance of public well-being. So harping on these issues that get ignored by people who will just respond to, we don't care, we don't care, we don't care. Well, we do. And we are the whole lot of us. So we should be making ourselves very clear about that throughout this period of time, as well as speaking to matters of emotional or psychological difficulties and the help that's necessary. I mean, I think that a lot of the attacks and things that have happened have really spoken to the failure to address emotional and psychological issues that people are having. And so really directly speaking to that, I think is going to be really important, as well as the scourge of hedonism is the word that I have here. And that may rub people the wrong way a bit, but whatever word you want to use for it, like sociopathic people, the people who just don't care about other people, really speaking to the scourge of the power and control that they have globally. Speaking directly to that, I think is going to be really important. The fact that people should be caring about the well-being of each other and of communities, because we don't just live in vacuums. We all have to live together. And when we don't address these issues, that's when we start to get these problems of explosive violence and things like this. Demanding plans to address community concerns on the local level all the way up as well. So making those community concerns a priority, insisting that they must be a priority. And if they are not, then threatening accountability for that. So directly speaking to, we will vote you out if you do not do this, and then following through. We are not going to get sucked into the nonsense donors that you have, flooding out the zone from anyone else running against you. If you don't address the community concerns, we will not support you. So forcing the issue, because we do most all have the same concerns. And honestly, the splits and the fissures in one specific political movement that we are seeing currently, I'm thinking about what's been going on in Arkansas and Nebraska with farmers and so forth. And yeah, it may be very frustrating that they got sucked into something that they should have known better about. And that the reason that they got sucked into it was the emotional appeals of like a hate-based movement and so forth. But when those communities are hit by the result of the not smart actions that they have taken against their own interests, recognizing there's room there. There's the ability to connect there, for better or worse, and not necessarily by everyone, but by some. Also, strike action, negotiation, again, emotional appeal, the whole we the people, kinds of arguments, creating that sense of unity and belonging, and taking direct action. So if strikes are necessary, we're probably going to see a lot of those. Negotiation, again, getting in there, making one's case with that trine between Jupiter and Saturn, finding the solutions, offering the solutions. And if people are not willing to work with those, vote them out, remove them. And the reason that I say this and that I'm kind of harping on this more so than usual in this video, and we're going to see this again with some of the videos coming up, speaking to these trines and everything, is that whoever is taking action based on their interests at this time will win the day. And they're going to set into motion some things that are going to be quite significant and push us out of this period of time. So there's an ability to create a genuine sense of a potential of accountability if people work together and are not getting distracted by division during this time. And I know that they're like those whose interests are very much support that division are going to be working overtime, and that's going to be more effective than we would think, but trying our best not to get distracted by that, not to get separated into different camps. So with all of that said, I think that is pretty much what I have for us for Mars and Scorpio. Again, next, I think we're going to be talking about the trine between Jupiter in Cancer and Saturn in Pisces, which is going to be ongoing throughout the autumn. And we're going to look at it from the perspective of those signs. We will probably start to address a little bit what's going to be coming up for us with that trine, the fact that it's going to be holding into the Aries and Cancer, and that it's going to be with us until 2027. But we'll talk about that whole thing in a separate video down the road as well. And then we will also look specifically at all of the nuances of the different planets that are coming through Scorpio and are going to be lighting that up. So Mercury is going to be joining with Mars there. It'll be doing that big retrograde, which is also going to be really super interesting and relevant with all of that. The sun's going to come through there. Venus is going to come through there. So it's going to be a fascinating season. I think that it's going to be more hopeful in a weird way. And I don't think that everything's going to look great, clearly, because I've said some difficult words in this video. But it's so much more functional than the crap that we've been dealing with for like a year and a half now, that I think it's going to be something of a welcome change of pace to assimilate what we've been dealing with for some time and then start to work our way toward the plans that we're going to be putting much more into action even next year as we start to really get into the new energies. But yeah, with all of that said, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I truly, truly appreciate it. If you don't mind hitting the like button, I would greatly appreciate that as well. It helps to boost the video in the algorithm. And do consider sticking around by subscribing for future videos where we look at different transits and take them through the houses. And thank you so much to the members of this channel for your support. So Angel Niblock, Michelle Howell, JJ, Deborah Kale Leavitt, Patrick McKenney, Jody, Anne-Marie, C. Rezer, Peace Out, Maria Cyril Hyro, Aya, The Z-Man 1291, Lynn Newman, Long T Standing, The Nelson Cat Maya, Connie DiMartino, Dali Gizi, Mango JT, B Love, Grace, Psyche Lloyd, Noah, Aquarian Antiquarian, Susan Martin, Jonathan Mason, Chad Wiseman, Ezekiel David LaRosa, Adrienne K, Astrology Party, SP, Karen, Teresa Jones, Seda Tupkooglu, Sherry Leas, Horse Dog Notebook, and Justice League Pie, and Nyoke Beam. Thank you so much. Much love to you. And yeah, if you are interested in membership information. That is all in the description box below. And other than all of that, let's go ahead and get into the sign by sign. All right, so for Aries, we have Mars and Scorpio taking place in your 8th house. And so this is likely to bring up and focus quite a bit of attention on how it is that your life intersects with other people's. So especially with regard to resources, emotional matters, psychological matters. So there's a lot of attention, basically, a lot of energy that's needing to be put into this area. This can indicate separations or splitting. For instance, if you have resources that are shared with someone else, splitting those, creating boundaries with those. But this could also indicate energy going into an area like that. So either a lot of focus on that, possibly even needing to create a commitment like that with someone. So financial relationships, business dealings, debts, taxes might even be a part of this, where I would expect for it to be a little bit frustrating, but putting energy into that, trying to sort that out. And then on the emotional, psychological level, getting more deeply involved with someone else's concerns. So this may be really needing to be forthcoming with others about what your needs are, what your expectations are, what your boundaries are within relationships. But it could also definitely be you needing to deal with those matters for other people. So I tend to see other people's psychological concerns, emotional concerns, their baggage show up in the 8th house quite a bit. And there's usually lessons around that. So there may be both of those kinds of things coming up, to where someone is kind of putting the onus on you a little bit, whether directly or indirectly, intentionally or not, to address or deal with or manage in some way, or even just focus on their problems. So someone could be being a bit negative. And I hate to say that because I love to be there for people at times, but you know how sometimes it can just become quite a lot. It's like, well, I've got all my own stuff going on. I don't know that I really want to deal with my own concerns plus you kind of trauma dumping on me, basically. So then needing to establish those boundaries that I was mentioning earlier. So there can be a both sides of this kind of an issue, and usually it is when we're dealing with emotional, psychological concerns, when we're dealing with 8th house concerns, generally speaking. There is a bit of a mirror of things that we try to avoid, or things that are either mirroring or opposite to what it is that we're putting out there. So for instance, yes, we can sometimes see emotional manipulation in this place, but it usually does stem from a sense of codependency on the part of the person who's receiving that, when we're dealing with these kinds of complicated Mars and Scorpio in the 8th house kinds of issues that can sometimes come up. So again, I would just say, if you're really feeling put upon, if something like that is coming up, if things are just kind of feeling heavy in your connections with other people, and you are not seeing a very direct solution to that, one, I sympathize because I struggle with that a lot. But I would say, is there anything that you can look at in terms of why you're having some trouble compassionately setting boundaries and having them be respected? Now, 100%, sometimes that is just totally on the other side and boundaries are ignored. But always worth kind of keeping in mind, looking inward a little bit as well. So we can definitely have some psychological breakthroughs of our own, confronting our own fears around security, stability, self-sufficiency, dependencies upon others, intimacy, trust, these kinds of issues that can come up. And Mars and Scorpio in this place, like I said, even if it shows up as something that's kind of annoying, probably trying to bring something to your attention so we can get those kinds of breakthroughs coming through with this as well. And some of those things may very well include matters of jealousy, control issues, power struggles in your connections with other people, interesting power dynamics that you might be seeing through some more. As I mentioned, we're getting a lot of transits through Scorpio coming up quite shortly here. We're also getting that tied into a Grand Trine that we're going to be talking about, and we'll take that through sign by sign as well and look at how that's all playing into this. So I would very much not be surprised if this Mars that's heading first into Scorpio is kind of laying the groundwork for a lot of realizations that are going to be coming through, especially throughout Scorpio season as we move closer and into that. And this can, it doesn't have to, but it can absolutely speak to romantic relationships that we're in. So that is always a good place to, if there are issues, maybe not sweep them under the rug when we're about to get a bunch of transits like this. So yeah, if you see any sort of weird feelings or things like that, it's probably best not really to sweep them under the rug, but also really great not to be hostile about it at all or confrontational, you know. So this is also going to lay the groundwork for bringing up some of these eighth house issues as desires, especially with Mars and Scorpio. Desire is a huge part of that, and it is deeply ingrained. It's not always overt, not always something that we share, but it's likely that there's going to be that desire to merge with other people, a desire to deeply transform how it is that you relate to other people and the depth of your connections. Superficial connections are probably not really going to be very satisfying throughout this period of time. So just kind of throwing that out there. You might find that you or someone else is doing a little bit of a TMI thing. So if you are kind of prone to that a bit, which if you have a lot of Aries in your chart, that can just kind of spill out at times. It might be kind of worth thinking that through as well. Sometimes that can be really helpful. And, you know, I personally am not very judgy about that. I kind of think that that's interesting when people are just very real. But, you know, if you want to avoid any sort of weirdness or anything around that. But yeah, like I said, this can be also a splitting. Mars can totally split things apart. So you may be cutting ties with some attachments that feel like there are hooks in them. Feel like there are hooks in you. Feel like there is, like you're being put upon, like you are potentially, like I said, being emotionally manipulated or something along these lines. If there's that stuff going on in your connections, it's going to be difficult internally throughout this whole broader season to overlook that anymore, because we're getting so many alignments in this eighth house, but then also tied into that from the 12th and the 4th, which can also be a place of really private seeing of how things truly are beneath the surface, even beyond the veil when it comes to connections and things like that. So karmic ties, karmic hooks, how to, like, if you are at all interested in any sort of cord cutting or things like that, this would actually be really, really helpful for something like that. Like a Mars and Scorpio in the 8th is actually weirdly an energy that you would want to be dealing with when trying to accomplish something like that. So yeah, I will also just say when it comes to spending, or again, I want to come back a little bit to that financial aspect and resource aspect of this house. If you're signing contracts, if you can put that off until after this transit, that might be wise. It might be best to wait until what we're dealing with is Sun, Mercury, Venus in this place rather than Mars. Also, pay attention to frustration or anger or resentment or all of those little negative emotions, not to just deny them or anything, but paying attention to them, seeing where they're cropping up. I hate to say they're probably a little bit more likely to come up with this transit going on, but look at where they're coming from, look at where they're stemming from, and then that can help you to get more to the root of that for when you don't have a transit like this, really pointing those out. But yeah, aside from that, I mean, as long as you can try to, keep the financial flows pretty balanced, then this should ultimately be relatively helpful. But it does definitely take a lot of presence of mind and paying attention to your emotional regulation, and also where you feel like your energy is being unduly pulled by other people. And that should give you the best results basically out of this transit for you. So yeah, I think that's pretty much what I have for you, Aries. So I hope this Mars treats you as well as possible. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Taurus, we have Mars in Scorpio transiting through your seventh house of partnerships, one-on-one connections, contracts, how you relate to other people. And so there can be some intensity when it comes to this area of life, your partnerships, your connections, and they're likely to require a lot more effort, energy, focus. So hopefully this is not the case, but it definitely could be that there's a bit of combativeness or belligerence on the part of other people or in those connections, some frustrations that are coming to the surface during this period of time. There could also be some potential jealousy or resentments, things like that, just those kind of underlying feelings that we don't love to have within connections. And that could be on your part, that could be on other people's part. It could be both. It could just be feeling a bit out of alignment. So potential power struggles or old conflicts needing to be dealt with throughout this period of time. Now, I will just throw out there, it might not be possible to avoid some of those things during this period of time, but we will be getting some transits through this area that I'm going to be talking about in a couple weeks here that might be more fruitful or more productive for addressing certain concerns. So it's kind of up to you as to whether you want to deal with it very directly with Mars here, or maybe try to smooth over some issues a little bit later in the year. But like I said, there might not be totally a choice when it comes to the timing. And there may be a real urge or desire to renegotiate partnerships to purge those unhealthy dynamics, to address any sort of difficult behavior or challenges in those connections that you have. This can also point to people just being a bit aggressive too. So just some things to keep in mind. If you notice that people are a bit off throughout this period of time, it can definitely point to that Mars. Now, on the other hand, this can also point to a lot of passions in relationships, a real desire to connect very deeply with other people, to pursue connections. And so if you're not feeling like you're having to address certain things or put out fires with certain relationships or things like that, this may really point to a desire to put more energy into or feel more deeply into your connections with other people as well. You may also find yourself just being more assertive with other people as well, or bringing in assertive people. So being a bit more direct, especially emotionally, or especially around emotional matters when it comes to other people and your connections. Really trying to get to the heart of matters. But ultimately, if you can bring a sense of balance, cooperation, working with other people toward common goals, that would be really great to focus on throughout this period of time. It might be a little bit more difficult to do that just because Mars and Scorpio in this place isn't the most balanced kind of an energy there, but it does give a lot of impetus to connect with other people. So if you can balance that self-interest and cooperation, balancing your boundaries with other people's, balancing your expectations with those of other people, then you should actually be able to be quite productive in your connections as well. And so, like I said, just kind of not beating around the bush, getting to the point with matters. You may even find that there's some kind of breakthrough when it comes to a partnership with this energy here. And yeah, like I said, purging unhealthy dynamics, Mars can split things. So this can indicate cutting ties with someone or stepping back from a connection, getting some distance from someone, especially if you feel like you've been really put upon by them, or that there's some kind of emotional manipulation there, that there's any sort of aggressiveness that you're not comfortable with. If there's anger, negativity there, if you feel drained or worked up in your connection with someone. So those are some dynamics definitely to watch for. And like I said, Mars can go a bit sideways at times. So if you're able to take a step back in a situation like that and then wait for Scorpio season to come through, The Sun and Mercury and Venus will all be in this house for quite a bit. And that's going to be a bit more of a gentle energy to be able to renegotiate those partnerships under anyway. But yeah, I think that that is pretty much what I have for you, Taurus. So I hope that Mars treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Gemini, we have Mars in Scorpio transiting through your sixth house. And this house has to do with your routines, with your work, with health considerations, with sense of service to others, as well as matters of your day-to-day habits. So you're likely to feel very busy during this period of time, feeling like there's a lot of stuff that you're needing to do. You might feel like you're kind of putting fires out here and there, like you're kind of working from behind, basically, and having to push and push and push yourself. Now, one of the big things with that is that there's a bit of a risk of burnout with that, feeling really overworked, feeling really irritated by your workload specifically, with the expectations that people are putting upon you and your time and what you are doing for them. So do try to keep that in mind. I would actually throw out there that it would be great if you could not overcommit to things during this period of time, because it's likely that there's going to be unexpected stuff coming up that you're just going to have to be dealing with, or that this being right on the back end of the eclipse season, you might still feel a bit tired or worn out from that eclipse season. And just taking care of your energy is going to be the best way to deal with this. That said, Mars does rejoice, so to speak, in the sixth house. That's one of the places where the significations that Mars brings can be realized in a productive way. So Mars tends to be pretty productive on its good days, but it also brings a sense of energy and effort in fighting the good fight, putting the effort into what it is that you're trying to get done. And the sixth house is a place that can really benefit from that. So you may be decently motivated to get stuff done. But again, keeping in mind, there's probably going to be just little irritating things that pop up here and there. So if you can try and make some time for that, try and save some space for those little things, possibly even little problems popping up here and there. Maybe you eat something that's a little bit weird and it takes you out pretty much for a day, and you wind up feeling like you're kind of falling behind. It's likely that it's going to feel on a lot of days throughout this transit like there aren't enough hours in the day. And that may be, in part, like I was saying, a lovely thing. In the beginning of this transit, we will actually have the Sun and Venus going through your fifth house. So some of this is going to be motivation and energy for passion projects, working on your skill set, trying to do things or pivot your life a little bit in a direction of something you're genuinely interested in doing, but having all of the other stuff that we have to deal with in life, again, it's probably going to feel like you're kind of burning the candle at both ends. So one of the things that can definitely take place with Mars in this place of physical health particularly is inflammation. So keep that in mind. If you're feeling kind of bloated, if you are eating stuff that is a little bit, but maybe not disastrously annoying for you, it might just have more of an impact throughout this period of time. So definitely worth keeping that in mind. You may even find this come up in other silly little ways, like mosquitoes or whatever, just little bites and things like that you're dealing with. Also potential for cuts and things like that. So be a little bit more careful with your body. Try not to sweep things under the rug. Try to be very careful when you are physically exerting yourself throughout this period of time. Little injuries and things like that can pop up with Mars in this place. It's not a guarantee, but it's a greater probability of that taking place, especially if you're rushing or if you were doing things in a frustrated or irritated manner. So yeah, this is also a place of coworkers. So like I said, you may be feeling like there's too much that's being delegated to you. You may feel like other people are not taking their responsibilities as seriously as you are yours, and therefore feel put upon by that as well, or feel held back and kind of frustrated or irritated by that. your coworkers themselves, because this can speak to how they are acting, they may also be a little bit more aggressive, more irritated, more moody. So yeah, again, the more that this Mars can be focused on just getting things done, that's going to give that Mars some sense of satisfaction, at least when something is accomplished. The frustration of things not being able to get accomplished can veer off in strange directions. And so coworkers would be one of those potential directions. So just kind of keeping that in mind. If you feel like being assertive or aggressive or like expressing your frustration with coworkers, it is a Mars transit and they can create issues. So especially given the fact that we will have a Mercury retrograde coming through this area quite shortly, probably worth it to just try your best to not have any ill feelings or hostilities arise. The more that you can tamp down on that, even if someone is kind of acting out of line. Now, on the other hand, when it comes to your own habits, your own daily routines, things like this, if you can use this energy also to address any sort of health issues, that's great. Exercise, any sort of health routines that you're trying to implement, this can give you more motivation to that end. But again, I would just caution a bit with physical exertion to not push yourself too far or to do something while you are frustrated. Also feeling motivated to restructure your routine or to create a new kind of schedule for yourself, new daily habits, things like this, probably so that you have more time for passion projects or for taking care of yourself. And with Mars, we can also cut things out, separate from things, split off from things. So when it comes to any sort of challenging or difficult, unproductive habits, especially any habits you're noticing have an impact on your health as well, cutting those things out, also really great way to actively utilize this transit. Improving efficiency, really getting to the heart of the matter. With Scorpio, it's really about focusing in, honing in on any sort of matter that it's dealing with. And so you can really precision target specific areas of your life that you're trying to cut out or trying to tweak. So you may also absolutely find yourself cutting out distractions and things like that, or really making an effort to like put your phone on do not disturb when you're trying to get things done, or assert boundaries when it comes to your time and everything. But again, with asserting your boundaries, I would just throw out there again, if you can do so in as cool-headed a manner as you can, that would be great, just to avoid triggering any of the more complicated aspects of Mars in that place, particularly when it comes to coworkers. But yeah, that is pretty much what I have for you, Gemini. Like I said, there's some other transits that are going to be coming through this area a bit later on as we start to get into Scorpio season. And those are going to be aligning really nicely with your houses. So if any complications or problems that you have in these areas of life, of routine, health, habits, coworkers, things like that, your workload, if you can address the complications with this Mars, that would be great. And then when Mercury and Venus and the Sun are in this place, hopefully you can really reap the benefits of having dealt with those more challenging aspects of it with Mars here. So yeah, I hope that this Mars transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Cancer, we have Mars in Scorpio transiting through your fifth house. So this can speak to pleasurable relationships. So seeking out a sense of romance, romanticizing your relationships, and really wanting to re-spark passion or bring in more passion to your romantic connections or seek that out in a connection. But this is also the fifth house, an area of your creative expression, your hobbies, your interests, your passion projects, what it is that you love to do. Your children can also show up in this place. So when it comes to creative projects, when it comes to creative self-expression, when it comes to really being yourself and really embracing yourself and your expression. This can bring a lot of energy and focus and motivation to those areas of life as well. So you may find it, especially if you've been feeling like you're stuck in a rut or anything like that recently, like you're wanting to re-spark that passion, re-spark that creativity, bring in some kind of project that's going to give you an outlet for that energy. And you will also, like I said, have several other planets coming through here. Mercury, the Sun, Venus, all coming through this house in Scorpio season as well. So this could absolutely be pointing to kicking something like that off, really taking bold action, especially when it comes to creativity, when it comes to connections. This could be pursuing someone of interest to you, being more bold in that area than you typically are. But ultimately, it's just going to give you this really strong urge to pursue pleasure, to pursue things that you love, to have fun, to connect with people, to really enjoy what it is that you're doing, and to create time, create energy for that area of your life. You may even find yourself like stepping back from some more serious or heavy, heady matters. So things like what's going on in the world, you might be taking a step back from that and looking to put the energy that you've put into paying attention to that into things that are actually enjoyable or pleasurable. If you've been working a lot, really carving out some time for something that's just fun, things like that. Now, if you have children, this can also be that they are demanding a lot of your energy, certainly, but they may have some really fun projects as well that are going on that you're somehow involved with or having to help them with. And that can also be a really wonderful outlet for this kind of motivation and energy that you have. Spending time with them, doing activities with them would be a really wonderful way to express this transit. There could be, though, some tempers involved there. So if you do find that your children are a bit more moody, that they swing, back and forth between how it is that they're feeling about certain things, if they're being a little bit negative, if they're getting frustrated or angry, this Mars can definitely speak to that. So being as patient as you can with that kind of thing, trying not to let it get under your skin, trying not to let it undermine your ability to have fun and enjoy life. That would be a really great way to respond to that if you possibly can. There's a lot of situations, obviously, in which that cannot be the case when dealing with children and their moods, but there can be matters of ego that do wind up coming in here. So there could be little ego conflicts, pushing, pulling, testing boundaries, things like that are taking place either in romantic relationships or with people that you're working on projects with or with your children as well. And yeah, other than that, committing to a creative project, being really driven, really passionate about it. You may find yourself kind of burning the candle at both ends here if you have a lot of work to do as well. The motivation here, I think, is going to override really wanting to relax. And this could kick something off, especially given how many transits you're getting through this area and the way that they are aligning to how Jupiter and Saturn are going to be in your first and ninth houses there. This could be a period of time that you look back on where you really embraced your creativity, where you really embraced your joys, your hobbies, your interests, and made space for them and made them a priority. And that in and of itself could really change your trajectory, not to mention your energy. I mean, with everything kind of being so serious, it feels like there's just so much serious energy in the world right now, and it's really sapping our ability to just be lighthearted, just have fun, just go out and enjoy ourselves, enjoy our own pleasures and preferences without needing to overthink things or worry about things. With the alignments that you're getting, they'll be really helpful to you to being able to create those boundaries for your joy and prioritizing that. So that is one way that I would really encourage utilizing this transit, is to create the space for that and try your best not to let more serious matters kind of encroach on that. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Cancer. So I hope that this Mars treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Leo, we have Mars in Scorpio transiting through your fourth house. And this house tends to do with home, family matters. It can also speak to your own private life, what's going on internally for you. So you may feel that there is a lot of energy demanded of you in these areas of life, that there's a lot of pressure, that you are needing to put a lot of time, effort, energy into tending to the needs either of your family or of your living situation, your home, or just private concerns that are requiring more of you than usual. Now, one thing is this can definitely point to argumentation or a little bit more belligerence or a little bit more assertiveness, aggression, attitude with family members. So Mars can straightforwardly point to fights and arguments and stuff. So that is something that is probably better to try to keep a cool head about, at least. You're going to get some good energies coming through here. You're going to get the sun, Venus, Mercury will go through here. Mercury will also be retrograde in this area all around Scorpio season. So there's better energies to work with if there's something that you need to address, but this can definitely point out issues and push you to a point where you really recognize, okay, there needs to be a change here. There needs to be addressing of this issue or this concern. And family members may also feel the same and be bringing things to your attention. But yeah, the extent to which you can keep a cool head about that would be great. It is easier said than done, though, because this Mars in Scorpio can also trigger some old wounds, some emotional matters, possibly even some generational patterns and things like this. Mars itself really does work with our ego concerns. And I know that's a loaded term, but we all have those concerns, those considerations. We do all work from that place from time to time. And so you may be feeling the need to kind of individuate in that sense of separating or severing ties or cutting ties with some old habits or patterns that come from family or that come from the way that your family relates to you and vice versa. And that would be a great way to utilize this transit, generally speaking, is addressing some of those concerns, especially if you're able to do that privately on a personal level. When we start getting other people involved, that's when Mars can be a bit combative. I mean, we can combat with ourselves, but it's a little easier to control. So yeah, the extent to which you can use this for that emotional cleansing, for confronting those family patterns, looking at them just really straightforwardly for what they are. Again, like I said, you're going to get some other transits through this area, and they're also going to be aligning in a helpful way with Saturn and Jupiter when those two are in, and they will also be aligning well with Jupiter and Saturn taking place and transiting through your 8th and 12th houses. So again, these are all very personal, private, internal concerns that may interact with some of your closest confidants and things like this. But the way that that's all unfolding, it's actually really helpful. But Mars coming through this area may just be kind of dredging some stuff up so that you know what it is that you're going to want to be dealing with or working throughout this broader season, basically. So yeah, any removing hooks from the past, any difficult memories, any past traumas, working through those, addressing those, you should have a good deal of motivation to do that with Mars here. And an ability to create that space, to create that separation, to create that severing with Mars here. And yeah, other than all of that, so speaking specifically to your home and living situation, this is quite protective. It's quite private about that. It can even be a bit defensive over privacy matters. That just may be your emotional world, your privacy, your private affairs may be quite important in the coming months. Like I said, especially with how many planets are coming through this area, with Jupiter in your 8th, with Saturn in your 12th, and you might just really need to create some space, protect that space for you and anyone else that is intimately involved in those considerations to be able to work through those things and improve upon those things. And that is perfectly fine. If you need to take some time to pull back from socializing, from putting yourself out there, from material concerns and things like that, I know that people still need to work and things like that. But if you can, again, create that space for yourself to where you're able to compartmentalize, shut out the world a bit, and just focus on what is of emotional priority to you throughout this period of time as well, that would be really excellent. And when it comes to your physical home property, where you're living, you may have a major urge to change, renovate, to purge that space. So you might be removing old memories, you might be removing clutter, releasing attachments to possessions throughout this period of time, and really focusing on how do these things make me feel, not the more security-oriented concerns so much of, am I going to have to replace this thing, or is it okay for me to release this memory? Things like that. I would focus a little bit less on those concerns than the how is your environment making you feel questions that are coming up. This could even stir up in you a desire to move, to separate from where you live currently. And there's no need to really rush on that process, I don't think, here, though you may feel like you want to rush with that. But I would allow for that to percolate, to really cook as an idea before really jumping on something like that, unless you have a specific opportunity. There's going to be a Mercury retrograde as well in this area in the coming months. So there's probably going to be a lot of thinking about where it is that you're living, if you're really satisfied with it. Again, if it makes you feel good. Sometimes we purge by moving to a completely different place. And sometimes we purge by renovating and changing things to change up the energy. And sometimes simply by tidying up, getting rid of old things, bringing in new things that make you feel better. Maybe even bringing in certain aspects or items that are intended to purify the space and keep the space purified. There may also be a challenge specifically that a family member is dealing with that you are needing to address throughout this time. I will say, again, we're getting some little bit more lighthearted energies, Mercury, Sun, Venus coming through this area on the back end of this transit. So if it seems like a lot, if it feels a bit emotionally overwhelming, something that a family member is needing throughout this time, that you should feel like you're getting support in time, even if it's not immediate. That said, also, if you feel very put upon, if you feel like you need to establish some boundaries with family members and what they are demanding of you, again, as cool of a mind as you can keep while setting those boundaries, the better. But Mars is very capable of doing that. So if that's ever something that you struggle with, this would actually be very helpful for doing so. And Scorpio can be cool-headed about things, so it's definitely not outside of the realm of possibility that specifically a Mars and Scorpio transiting through your fourth house period of time would actually be easier to be able to establish those boundaries and then hopefully hold them going in the future. Yeah, I think that's a lot of what I have for you, Leo. So I hope that this Mars treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Virgo, we have Mars in Scorpio transiting through your third house. And the third house has to do with your community, the people, places, things around you, communication, exchange. So there could be some conflict in these areas. You may even find that your own communication style becomes a little bit more straightforward, more to the point, and may come across as combative to other people. So that is something to keep in mind, is that your words are going to have a greater impact and are going to come across as a lot more sharp than usual. And this may be especially the case with siblings, neighbors, community members, people that you casually deal with on a day-to-day basis, basically. And that can certainly lead to some breakthroughs if there's been some frustration along these lines. You may need to speak up for yourself You may need to kind of defend your position. This could be a boundaries thing. This could just be attitudes that are unacceptable. And the thing is, this can also make those people around you a bit more combative than usual too. So this can be a bit of a chicken or an egg situation where people are a bit more combative, push your buttons more when they're communicating with you, and therefore when it comes to community members or those around you needing to establish some boundaries, maybe needing to take a step back. There can even be a kind of severing of ties that winds up taking place with Mars in the mix. And so there could be a connection that winds up separating. But in the least, if there's a lot of frustration and irritability between you and other people, it is worth it to probably just take a step back. You will get some other transits through this place shortly. In Scorpio season, you're going to get the Sun and Mercury and Venus through this area. So that could clear a lot of that up if this area is quite frustrating to you during the lead up to those transits. Now, there could also be some tech issues, so worth keeping in mind. One thing that I have kind of learned to do with annoying transits that have to do with tech is that sometimes I find that if there's a weird thing that pops up and it's indicated in my transits, I kind of just wait it out. And I've definitely seen that that can solve a lot of issues, is just waiting things out. But there could absolutely be a phone or a laptop or something that winds up needing to be replaced around this period of time as well. That said, if that's something that's coming up, it would probably be wiser to wait until after this Mars in the third transit before making a purchase like that. At that point, then you're going to have some helpful energies in this house rather than Mars, which can be a bit complicated in terms of big tech purchases. You could also find yourself with a lot of mental energy or very restless mentally, communicatively, trying to solve for things, wanting to connect and make sure that you're on the same page with other people. And this could become a little bit obsessive or a lot of overthinking. So really spinning your wheels. And specifically on any sort of a problem that you know is solvable, but you haven't quite figured it out yet, it might be difficult to shut that off. So this could even wind up impacting you in terms of insomnia and things like that. If you're able to compartmentalize those things, that would be great, but I'm not sure that that's going to be altogether controllable through this period of time. So best to just know that your mind is probably going to be reeling. You're not losing it. You're just getting a transit that is indicative of something like that. Also, if there's any dishonesty within communication, any issues along those lines, lies, power dynamics, words that undercut confidence, things along those lines, little games that people play in your neighborhood as well, possibly. That's going to be more difficult for you to just overlook or just sweep under the rug throughout this time. I would be a little concerned with like things snowballing. So great to have a really cool head when you are confronting those kinds of things, but you will really have that urge to just deal with things much more directly. Given the political temperature right now, it might be wise to just kind of avoid Facebook throughout this period of time because it might piss you off even more than usual. That said, this is potentially very persuasive. So this Mars in Scorpio really getting underneath the issue, really getting to the point, getting to the heart of a matter, speaking very directly. This can make you very persuasive in terms of communication. And it's also going to drive up that desire in you to communicate. So when it comes to writing, when it comes to presenting ideas, putting things forward, teaching what you've learned. Even you may be devouring books throughout this period of time too, because there can also be that obsessiveness about taking in information too. But usually Mars is going to be a bit more overt. So communication, research, presenting that, disseminating your ideas, expressing your feelings, expressing your passions. that's going to be something that's going to be much more of a strong urge throughout this period of time. So definitely worth keeping that in mind. It would be a great time to start journaling. Like I said, you're also going to get some pretty nice placements running through this area. Mercury's going to be on the heels of Mars there, and then we're going to have the Sun and Venus in this place. We'll get a big Mercury retrograde. I just think that would be a super fascinating period of time if you don't already journal to be doing something like that. Because when you look back over that, you're probably going to find it a lot more enriching than you realized. And yeah, other than that, I mean, we're going to go into how this is playing into Jupiter in Cancer and Saturn in Pisces here very shortly as well. It does look like a pretty social, communicative, exchange-oriented kind of a time that's coming up for you for the rest of the year. But until we dig into all of that, I hope that this Mars transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Libra, we have Mars in Scorpio transiting in your second house. And the second house has to do with your resources, so finances, income, your values, skill set, abilities. So this area of your life is going to be taking a lot of focus. It's going to be highly motivating to you throughout this transit. So you may have a real desire to increase your earnings, to increase your savings, or somehow secure resources or develop your resources throughout this time. And keeping in mind that those resources can also be a bit more abstract. So in terms of your skill set, in terms of like even your certifications, what it is that you have that you're able to utilize in order to develop more resources for yourself, what it is that you are bringing to the table. So really wanting to increase that, wanting to work on that, wanting to develop that, wanting to focus on that, putting a lot of energy into that. Now, this can also be a bit impulsive when it comes to spending. So that is something to keep in mind, is that it's great to go out a bit out of your way to avoid overspending when Mars is in your second house. But what's interesting is you may even find it, that impulse as it comes up, your experience of that somewhat different throughout this period of time. So really having the urge to save, the urge to secure your resources, override that and overpower that. And thus you may wind up really saving a lot more than you typically do throughout this period of time, just through sheer will. That is how Mars in Scorpio tends to work, is just through sheer focus and will. So that impulse will be there, but you may also have a lot more willpower to keep that in check, even more so than when you don't have Mars here. You may also find yourself a bit defensive with regard to resources, values, things like this. So boundaries when it comes to your resources, who it is that's able to have access to that. You may be drawing boundaries or cutting that off in some ways. Any sort of a drain on your resources, your finances. So for instance, old subscriptions is a perfect example of this. But you may also find that there's something that's even a little bit more personal when it comes to like a subscription or paying dues to a specific community or something like this that you just haven't really been feeling for a while anyway, and pulling those resources back then. Also, when it comes to gift giving and things along those lines, just kind of maybe pulling back a little bit more than usual and spending on things that genuinely increase your quality of life or saving that. You'll also be likely more defensive about your values. So when it comes to what your priorities are, what you think is really important, what you truly value in life, really not wanting for that to be intruded on by others. Being really willing to defend that and kind of cordon that off for yourself. But do try and keep in mind, Mars in Scorpio might see an attack that isn't actually coming. So it might get defensive without actually being triggered to do so. So that is something to keep in mind. You might be a bit over defensive when it comes to your values. So even when it comes to your views on certain things, you might be a little bit quick to respond through this period of time. And internally, you may even be reevaluating what you truly value. So there's a lot of energy, a lot of motivation, a lot of focus in on this area. And that can definitely speak to little events or triggers or things like this that cause you to look over these things a bit more. You're going to get a Mercury retrograde in this area on the heels of this Mars transit. Mercury's going to catch up to Mars in Scorpio. They'll go into Sag, and then Mercury's going to come back into Scorpio retrograde. So that is something to keep in mind. It's likely that this is going to feed into more and more thoughts about, again, how is it that you are bringing in your resources? What resources are you bringing to the table through which you are able to boost your earnings and things like this? What are your values? What's truly important to you? What's truly a value? What's truly a priority for you? What aspects of life genuinely contribute to your sense of quality of life, enjoyment of life, emotional fulfillment, things like this? So these are really going to be top of mind, and these are pretty big questions. They're not just material questions. They are ultimately much more fundamental, speaking to matters of your sense of security, stability, self-sufficiency, self-reliance, trust, things like this. So I wouldn't be surprised if you really are thinking deeply about these things, and specifically how they relate then to questions around your sense of success or ambition, goals, accomplishments, things like that, especially as the transits that are coming through this area wind up linking up with Jupiter and Saturn and the other water signs. But yeah, ultimately, what I most would not be surprised about would be something around cutting expenses, so canceling subscriptions, things like that, or pursuing a raise or a different stream of income. So this could be monetizing something that you're really passionate about, something that you really love to do, that might be creative in some way or just truly meaningful to you. Again, specifically because of the way that this transit is going to be lining up with Saturn and Jupiter. You may be really monetizing something that has a great deal of meaning to you throughout this period of time. Really this whole season, so into December even. So in terms of spending, I would just at least make sure that that's in balance. If you want to go to extremes of like saving and things like that, and really budgeting and so on, I would say go for it. That can always be nice to do from time to time. But as long as that's in balance, I think you should be pretty good with this. You're going to be highly motivated to bring in resources and to develop them. So yeah, I think that's pretty much what I have for you, Libra. So I hope that this Mars treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Scorpio, we have Mars and Scorpio transiting through your first house. And the first house has to do with you personally, how you present yourself, how you approach your life. This can also reflect your physical body. So this transit is likely to be very much impacting your physical energy, your willpower, definitely getting noticed throughout this period of time, perhaps not always in the most gentle or favorable or positive of light, but as formidable as bringing your energy to a given situation. So being noticed for that, standing out. Mars does rule Scorpio according to the traditional rulership schema. So Mars is right at home in this place for you, and that is an energy that you're capable of utilizing, especially in this scorpionic kind of a way, which is more direct, it's more energetic, it's more intuitive and determined. So speaking to your willpower, you may find that you are feeling a bit more obsessive about certain things, that you are being much more assertive, and it's not just determined, it's focused, it's insistent. So if you have been desiring to direct your energy better, that of course being something that would be desirable to Scorpio, this Mars will be helping you to do that, to focus, to be determined, to accomplish specifically what it is that you're setting out to, regardless of what may crop up. So you can absolutely utilize this. But again, when it comes to the physical presence and getting noticed aspect, it's definitely not all bad. But do keep in mind that sometimes people can get triggered by these things. Sometimes people can have a negative reaction to a strong energy that they're picking up on. So that intensity, that magnetism, that seeming formidable, bringing that kind of formidable energy to situations, it can be a double-edged sword. So do keep that in mind, and hopefully try not to take it too personally if people do have weird reactions throughout this time. That kind of comes with the territory. So that said, if you're really wanting to make your mark on a situation, if you're wanting to stand out, if you're wanting to bring intensity and passion to something that it is that you're doing or that you're being seen for, so in your working life, if you are trying to make an impression upon someone for really whatever reason, if you are a creative type, really intensely infusing your energy into those things in a way that will have you stand out. And the energy, the essence of your energy itself is going to be rather magnetic. So again, just keeping in mind, some people who have unresolved stuff can react to that quite strongly. So yeah, the primary way that you will be feeling this internally will be along the lines of this urge to take the initiative, to take the lead, to confront issues, to deal with things, to address things. So when Mars sees something that it doesn't like, it is going to want to take action to address that, to solve that, to correct for that, to improve upon that, to direct that in a direction that it's wanting for that to go in, including people. Now, I always caution around that too, in terms of there's also this kind of ability to persuade is another energy that this winds up bringing up for you. And so try to use that for good, as is always my PSA when it comes to things like that. But you can definitely take on a leadership role and lead people to specific outcomes and keep them on track, basically. So that's that directive kind of energy. Now, another way that you can definitely be feeling this quite acutely throughout this period of time would be these aspects of Mars, aside from increased energy, increased drive, increased passion, initiative, so on. It can also turn to anger, impatience, frustration, irritability. So try to watch out for that. Try not to be too rash, especially if something looks like it's going off course and the urge to get that back on track is so strong that you wind up kind of overdoing it a bit, or you wind up acting a little bit rashly. One thing that is helpful of Scorpio for Mars is that typically as a fixed sign, it can take that longer view and focus specifically on those outcomes and not so much the kind of day-to-day whims, basically, that Mars can focus on quite a bit more in Aries. But we do still need to be a little bit cautious about rash action that might ultimately wind up throwing something off a bit due to stepping on toes, things like that, due to a frustrated, well, F it kind of a thing that I'm sure we've all had experiences with. And then we come back to it, we're like, okay, well, that was dramatic. So do try and watch out for that kind of impulsivity, also aggression. And when it comes to first house transits, I do also tend to emphasize that this can also be energies that are coming at you. So not just your own aggression, but if other people are getting very irritable or impatient with you or angry or aggressive, it would be wise to try and take a step back from that, to try to sidestep some of those energies. Because another thing with the fixity of Scorpio and Mars being very strong in this place is that if someone gets into a negative state about something or gets irritable about something, it can be a bit more difficult to get them out of that state. So things can snowball a bit. And there can be resentments and grudges and things like that that go on for quite a while. But yeah, ultimately, really excellent, strong for asserting your boundaries, for starting personal projects, for focusing in on what's truly significant to you, what really gets you going, what you're very passionate about, what you're excited about, as well as reshaping your identity around that. So if there are certain things, for instance, certain aspects of yourself that you've been backburnering, that you've been kind of sweeping aside for the sake of other considerations and so forth, this would really help you to reaffirm those things that are really important to you, and then to try and better shape your life around those things so that they carry a greater priority, basically. But yeah, other than that, standard, any sign, Mars in the first house, little cautions around cuts, burns, things like that. So in Scorpio, I would actually also say infections, inflammation, things like that. Just being a little bit more cautious about what it is that you're doing physically and whether you could hurt yourself with that. If that's the case, I would also try to avoid those kinds of activities while in a state of frustration, because it increases the likelihood of you expressing that Mars in a physical way, whether directly or indirectly, and then that energy impacting your body as well. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I have for you, Scorpio. So I hope that this Mars treats you super well. Keep in mind, it is in a sign that it's comfortable in, so it shouldn't be too rough, and it should actually be quite helpful. So I hope that it is, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Sagittarius, we have Mars in Scorpio transiting through your 12th house. And the 12th house has to do with your subconscious, things that are kind of outside of your control, things that you hold in, things you keep private that you don't necessarily share with other people. This is also a place of isolation, solitude, spirituality. We can see when it comes to the subconscious patterns, conditioning, things like that. This is also a place of self-sabotage at times. So just kind of keeping that in mind as well. So yeah, this really turns your energy inward quite a bit. And the thing with Mars, it is a malefic. It's in its own sign, and it's going to be beyond those first few days where it's square to Pluto. Good to watch out for that. But beyond that, it's decently well aligned throughout this period of time. It's not too rough of a transit. So once we get past the end of September, it should lighten up a little bit, and it shouldn't be too terrible. But it is Mars and Scorpio, very energetic, very vibes-based kind of a Mars. So it'll be impacting you very likely on that level, especially in your 12th house. So if you feel drained, if you feel restless, if you feel that obnoxious sense of, I feel like I need to be getting this done, and I'm so impatient with myself about it, and I just feel like I keep running into an energetic wall when I try to do this. The extent to which you cannot internalize that as a frustration, I think the better, because that's not ultimately going to get that Mars back on track. That Mars in Scorpio in the 12th, if you start to go in that direction, could get a bit out of hand in terms of turning frustration and anger inward. So it doesn't have to be that way. Just kind of keep that in mind. Also, difficulty expressing your anger openly. And again, keeping in mind that can create that cycle of internalized frustration that can grow. And so that can become, when it comes to other people, even resentment, jealousy, frustration, things like this that can turn into a grudge, or can turn into a longer term kind of negative feeling towards something. So just really worth keeping those things in mind, that's a very internalized Mars and Scorpio energy. You can utilize it, and really anything in Scorpio, to purify. That is ultimately the purpose, is to direct and purify the energy effectively. But if you're not able to do that, and you're also not able to take your foot off the gas and just be patient with yourself and give yourself some time, do keep in mind that negative cycles can snowball with Mars and Scorpio there. So this is also likely to be bringing up, potentially even triggering, some subconscious patterns, secrets, things like that. So things may even come to light. I would expect that these are things that are not the most wonderful, but ultimately probably pretty helpful. Again, because we have some other transits coming through this area that will also lighten up the energy, as the Sun and Mercury and Venus are also in this place. So you may recognize a pattern that is based in, say, childhood conditioning. And we may look at that from the outset and say, oh, that's great to know. How wonderful to know. And ultimately, yeah. But when you're in that moment, that can feel a bit daunting. It can feel kind of frustrating. It can feel like, well, man, if I had known that this whole time, I probably would have made some different choices, and the frustration that can come from that. So if those kinds of things come to light, if you recognize where some patterns are coming from internally due to conditioning, due to expectation, things like this, where you hold yourself back as well, do understand that the purpose of this period of time would be to clean that up, to purge that, to release that, rather than, again, to dwell on it or hyper focus on it such that it winds up growing. So yeah, I won't harp on this too much, but there could be a bit of a temptation to self-sabotage or to isolate, to avoid people, to feel like, what's the point when it comes to connecting with people? And I would look at that if you were to be feeling that way, and see if there is a worthiness issue or a deservingness issue internally that might be sparking something like that. That would be where that kind of self-sabotage comes in. So again, even a temptation to self-sabotage with Mars coming through this area, it can be really helpful because it can point that out to you and then help you to purge that as you move forward in life, basically. And yeah, ultimately, this is really powerful for that inner healing work. That's what it's about. And the things that we need to heal are usually not the nicest aspects. So that's why it's hitting on so many of these different things, bringing those to light, enabling you to recognize and then heal them. Now, this is also really motivating for spiritual or psychological work, emotional work. If you find that you are a whole heck of a lot more emotional throughout this period of time, that would be very normal. And I would say 100% allow that. Don't try and act like you're being dramatic or anything. There's probably stuff that's going on. Again, this is a place that's usually, unless something is triggering it like this Mars, it's usually outside of our view. So these things go on without us really knowing. And there will be a lot that's going on that is that's still under the surface that you might not be fully aware of, that's being purged, that's being worked through. So I would say definitely allow yourself more emotional leeway throughout this period of time. Now, when it comes to expressing that outwardly, Mars is really great at doing that in a not so helpful way. So fortunately with it in the 12th house, you can kind of do this on your own and, have these experiences, purge some of this, maybe emotional material and things like this. You may even find that you're doing this through dreams. That's another 12th house thing. You may be having some really intense dreams that are a bit heavy, but what they're doing is they're working on processing. They're working on purging potential fears, anxieties, things like this, putting that into a narrative so that you can confront it and experience it and then release it in that dream state. And then recognize your own inner strength, your own inner fortitude to move forward beyond that. This is a great transit for retreats. When it comes to a temptation to isolate, that might not be completely wrong or bad to do. If it's coming from a place of worthiness things or what's the point and so on and so forth, that's definitely worth looking into. But you can definitely get a lot done with this influence on your own, stepping back, retreating, purging, working through all of this material in solitude. But yeah, I think that is a lot of what I have for you, Sagittarius. I will say, again, this isn't the most overt house. So with a lot of aspects of your life, this could very well go under the radar and be something that you grapple with, that you work with when you are in solitude. So I know that this sounds a bit daunting here, but again, it's really just inner healing work. And it won't necessarily feel like it's ever present throughout your day-to-day life when it's in the 12th house either. So yeah, with all that said, I hope that this Mars treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Capricorn, we have Mars transiting through Scorpio in your 11th house. And this house has to do with hopes, dreams, aspirations, benefactors, friends, allies. social groups, socialization, society, things like this. So this is bringing a lot of assertiveness to this area, and it can bring that into your personality. So taking on a leadership position, really asserting your ideas, your directives, your priorities, your passions within group settings, pushing for change, pushing for kind of your agenda, I guess would be one way of putting that, though that has negative connotations. But yeah, really putting your energy, your ideas out there as worthwhile, and being willing to persuade as well as defend those ideas with Mars in this place. Now, there may be, of course, with that said, some conflicts or power struggles that wind up cropping up within those social circles. So with friends, with networks, with colleagues, you may also run into someone who is doing something like this within those groups, and then therefore feel the need to meet that even more. One thing I would say with this is when we're dealing with Scorpio, it does have the ability to keep a cool head if necessary. And so even though it's very passionate, determined, focused, and so forth, it can keep things on track by controlling and directing one's own emotions about a situation. And so I would utilize that. That can be really helpful in those situations to prevent them from snowballing. You may also have a friend or a social circle around you, colleagues, that are facing complications or challenges, things like this, where you might be putting a lot of energy and effort into addressing what they're going through as well with Mars in your 11th house. You may really want to help a friend or someone solve something. And this could even just be hearing them out, giving them ideas about how to change the situation for them. So basically looking at that pushing for change in social circles from a different angle there as well, if they're going through something. But again, there can be frustration, anger, power challenges, power struggles rather, things like that with friends as well. So yeah, this helps you also to lead a community. Long-term strategy as well, especially as we get deeper into this transit and it starts to align with Jupiter and Saturn. Strategizing and focused energy, getting your ideas on track with other people is going to be a really significant factor here for you. And then bringing that leadership to those situations. So what's the big idea? What's the long-term plan to get there? And then what action are we going to take day to day to get there? That's all aligning in a really very helpful way for all of us. For you, it's in that area of socialization, community, the people, places, things around you, basically. So I really would not be surprised if you find yourself in a leadership position throughout this period of time as well, or even stepping into one during this period of time. So yeah, when it comes to those long-term goals, those collective efforts, hopes, dreams, aspirations, this can be a major impetus, a major motivation and momentum to those ends. So if there's anything that you've been backburnering, if there is anything where you have been feeling like it's difficult to kind of kickstart yourself, even though you know that there's something that you're wanting, this is really going to light a fire under you to pursue those things, especially if there's a group dynamic to it, though that's not absolutely necessary with the 11th house. So yeah, I think you're going to be really goal-oriented throughout this period of time, which of course is very helpful. But just avoid that kind of competitiveness, that jealousy within those social circles. If you see that in other people, maybe try to sidestep or assuage that a little bit. I know that's kind of annoying, but just again, to prevent it from snowballing into something else. Now, another thing with Mars is that it can cause fissures and separations. So again, those issues that can crop up in social circles, you may during this period of time actually decide to split ways with certain people or vice versa. And there may be some negative feelings around that. So that kind of is what it is. Often in situations like that, there's not too much that we can do about it, but you may decide to just step away from certain people, especially if there's any sort of emotional manipulation or emotional challenges or things that other people aren't addressing in themselves and that they keep bringing to you, that you keep needing to put your energy and effort into. That's something that would really frustrate the alignments that are coming up for you, in particular this Mars. So it can also be really helpful if you're thinking about these things, if that's a matter basically that's coming up, if you can really look at what are the ideal social situations for you. Is there an energy in the mix that seems to be casting some complication or difficulty, and then trying to address that, because you will be super effective in addressing that throughout this period of time too. But yeah, I think that that's pretty much what I have for you, Capricorn. So I hope that this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Aquarius, we have Mars in Scorpio transiting through your 10th house, and your 10th house has to do with your public facing role, your public life, your reputation, your career, your ambitions, the place that you create for yourself in the world. So there's a lot to say about this. You're likely to be really ambitious throughout this period of time, to be quite focused, very much directing your energy toward those career goals that you have, those ambitions that you have, the improvements that you're wanting to make to the path of where you're at, where you're trying to go, getting really focused on, okay, how do I get from A to B? Let's do that. Let's not hesitate on that. Let's just get it done. You may also find that you have a greater urge to pursue a public role that is specific. So for instance, if you don't look at yourself as that quote unquote ambitious of a person, generally speaking, that can really drive this up in you of, no, this is something that I want and I'm going to go after it. So there's that desire to control or to transform your role in the world, especially when it comes to career. If you see something that you want, if you see a role that you want, you see a type of life that you want for yourself, this is going to really give you the impetus, the momentum, the motivation to go after that, and to desire to control the steps, that direction between those things, and to recognize, okay, I can guide my energy toward this. And so that's what I'm going to do. Now, that can definitely give you a reputation for being quite intense, for potentially even being a bit intimidating. So that is something to keep in mind, is that you're likely giving off that energy a bit more in those kinds of settings as well, in public settings, as someone who is really formidable, someone who is quite ambitious, someone who does go after things, someone who is very capable, who's hitting their marks. But some people can react to that in ways that we wouldn't necessarily desire. This isn't like soft, cozy, warm feelings necessarily, unless someone is just really impressed by what it is that you are doing throughout this period of time, what it is that you're getting done, I should say, throughout this period of time. So if there are people, for instance, that you know that tend to get a bit jealous, envious, things like that, irritable about recognition for other people, it might be worth trying to see if you can not trigger them too much, just keeping in mind that you are more likely to trigger people like that throughout this period of time. And I know that that can be annoying, and it can be like, why do I need to watch out for them? But just to keep things from snowballing, basically, because there can be this energy with Mars here of clashing with people, clashing with authority figures, or clashing with other people who are maybe also looking for recognition as you're pushing to claim your place and to get recognized. So for instance, this could be a boss that is worried about you, quote unquote, coming after their job, you outshining them, you outperforming them. So again, just little things to keep in mind. If there's ways that you know to assuage that, to get around that, to not trigger that kind of a reaction, it would be great to do that while also remaining focused on getting things done and your ambitions and so on and so forth throughout this period of time. You may also face some aggression or assertiveness or overambition of ladder climbers, authority figures around you. So hopefully that's not the case, but it definitely could be. that during this period of time, someone is extra moody, really intense, perhaps very domineering, even of an authority figure. This could absolutely be a boss that you're dealing with that is not so much asking, but telling people to do certain things. So, as far as that goes, best thing I could say to that would be try not to take it too personally. It's there in the transits. Unfortunately, it'll wind up passing. But your urge to that while this transit's going on is probably going to be to meet it with the same thing. And again, it's just that snowballing thing that Mars can definitely do in Scorpio, because it's a fixed sign, it's a water sign, it's emotional. And when it has an emotional reaction to things, which all of us do to things like that, it can stay fixed and stay in that kind of a direction. Now, it's not always going to be overt, but this could be a domineering boss getting a grudge from you and you not liking that person long term for a while. And yeah, that can be helpful to know where you stand with someone, even if it's not overt, but that kind of feeling can get in the way of those potentially beneficial relationships and so forth. So just another little warning there. But yeah, ultimately, this is about making those big career moves, pushing yourself beyond what you previously would have thought. So this could be a speed thing. This could be you taking a big leap, basically. You being really motivated, possibly even to go independent. Scorpio is a pretty private sign. And so you may be, so for instance, if you're running into a domineering boss, this could be the kind of trigger that would cause you to start to think about and start to plan for, what if I were to do this? What if I were to work in this field or some other field independently? So little things like that can crop up and then set into motion that intention of yours. And when you get this energy focused, again, it stays focused. So one thing I would avoid with this as well is burnout. So you may be burning the candle at both ends for sure. You may be taking work home with you. You may be really going above and beyond. And that could be taking work home with you also in the sense of, yeah, I really want to get something independent started up. So when I'm going home, I'm then doing that kind of a thing. Just pay attention to your energy levels relative to what your ambitions are. So they can take a lot of energy throughout this time because that's where you're going to want to direct it. Something to keep in mind. And then, yeah, those ego battles, that's generally what Mars is working with, is that the circle, the boundary, the self, and then that arrow of going after something. And if someone else also wants that, that can really turn into matters of ego battles that might not necessarily tamp down once this transit moves on, if it's set in motion during this period of time. Because again, we're dealing with a fixed sign here. There could also be some bad news, some stress, some concern, some fear when it comes to your career as well. So I'm hoping that this wouldn't look like layoffs around you or something like that, or weird industry news. I wouldn't freak out about that. If that is something that when you hear it, you are motivated to try to get out ahead of that and make whatever adjustments you feel like you need to make, whether it be an industry shift or looking for something else or whatnot. That's great, but an unaddressable fear can also fester with this. So I wouldn't lean too hard into that. One last final thing is going to be with Mars, we can see splits. So this could even be a desire to quit a job or to no longer work with someone. And again, when the scorpionic passions get worked up, it can be difficult sometimes to contain them, especially in the beginning of this transit, 100%. Especially in the beginning of this transit when it is squaring Pluto, which is transiting through your first house, which I talked about in a video like a year ago, really. So whereas you may be typically emotionally regulated, Aquarius, typically pretty good at emotional regulation, you may find that your outward reaction, response to things is stronger and less in control than you usually would expect. So yeah, I would say toward that period of time, because that's a sharp square for you. That's 10th house, first house. Those are the big time two houses basically in your chart. So when it's square to Pluto in your first, try your best to be aware of anger, reactions, outbursts, things like that. Because I wouldn't want for you to rashly decide I'm going to step away from something, or rashly decide this needs to be dealt with now and then regret it a bit. So end of September, I would be kind of extra careful about shaking the hell out of your career through an emotional response to something that emotional response, that feeling would be, I need to get this in control because I am not feeling that I have control over it, you know? So, and by that, I mean acting to assert control over an external situation, you know? Be as patient as you can with yourself. It may even be super worth taking a step back during that kind of, what is it, about the last week plus of September. So September 21st, 22nd, really from the eclipse through to October, I would be extra careful for you personally. So yeah, I kind of want to end on a good note here. I'm just going to reinforce this is good, big career moves, being really ambitious, really focused, determined. If you struggle with attention issues and things like that, this should help with that quite a bit, with setting a goal, achieving it, and that being a major reward in itself. And then, yeah, all those little cautions that I mentioned there. But yeah, I hope that this Mars treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Pisces, we have Mars in Scorpio transiting through your ninth house. And the ninth house has to do with big ideas and expansion, expanding your horizons, expanding your mind, expanding your experience. And so areas of life that fall under this tend to be travel, education, philosophy, worldview, things like this, publishing as well, disseminating your ideas, your knowledge, your worldview. So this is going to be driving up a lot of focus, determination, drive, passion toward those areas of life. So toward travel, learning, philosophy, spiritual growth, the spiritual aspects of your life. And these are the more heady kind of spiritual aspects of life. So certainly meditation, rituals, things like that can wind up falling into this place. So you may have a really strong urge to go and travel somewhere, to experience something. This could be a sense of intellectual boredom that gets stirred into a specific direction, such that you're really wanting to study it, read up on it a bunch, you devour a bunch of, long form YouTube videos about it, things like that, and really sink your teeth into a topic, a subject, especially if it's a big picture subject like philosophy, ethics, any sort of humanities, things like this. Now, one thing that I would caution about with this a bit is that you could totally get into fights over beliefs, over worldview, over philosophy, and over those big picture things. So when it comes to what's the big idea, what are your political views, what are your spiritual views, things like this, that is a lot more passionate right now. And there is a major potential for fighting about that, arguing over that. And you and others that you're dealing with on those topics being angrier and more willing to say pretty biting things about views or things like that you disagree with, or to defend your own views and so forth. So it's likely you will want to challenge others' views, but do keep in mind it remains just as fraught throughout this period of time as that always is. So that might not have the best outcome. But you may also really feel the need to draw some lines in the sand. mean, look at the world right now. You may feel the need to draw some really strong boundaries about what it is that you feel is acceptable and what is not. And personally, I have to say, I wouldn't fault you for that. But again, just kind of keeping in mind that the arguments, that the fights that happen around that, much more likely to be long-term, to stay fixed, to actually cause a fissure in a connection with someone, and to snowball when Mars is in this place. And this could even then become a sense of conflict with ninth house people, mentors, teachers, also big institutions. So I would say as well, if you're dealing with another country, if you're dealing with a legal thing, courts, contracts, things like this, educational institutions, Mars is a malefic planet. If we were to be very fatalistic about our interpretation here, which I never am, but I'm going to throw it out there just because I think it's important. It can indicate a negative outcome. So if there's a legal concern or something along those lines, I wouldn't push it during this period of time. Just to do what you can, basically, to avoid that kind of a negative outcome. And I do buy into the more modern approach, the more psychological approach of, I do think that we can sidestep some of the worse, more fatalistic kinds of outcomes from malefic planets if we're working with the energy, which is to say, just stay focused, just the facts. What's the track? What's the intended outcome? And what kinds of actions will get you to that outcome? So I'll give you a super literal but very improbable example here, which would be if your intention is to win a legal case, then directly challenging the judge is not likely to get you there, kind of a thing, if that makes sense. Rather, putting the energy into making sure that you have all the facts, that you are really focused on making your argument persuasively, that's the best way to get a good outcome in that, again, improbable situation. So yeah, when it comes to this, there is this desire to persuade. That's one thing I will also throw out here. Sure, there's going to be a desire to convince people of things. We don't really live in that world right now. Is one little piece of advice I would give about that. People are really fixed in their views right now. So try not to get frustrated, try not to internalize a sense of impatience with your ability to persuade someone. People aren't the most persuadable right now. So try not to get too frustrated about that if you possibly can. I know it is frustrating. A little personal tidbit. The past few years, I was a journalist and I stepped back from that because it was like, people already believe what they want to believe. You can present them with all the facts you want, but it's not the time. You're kind of just basically wasting your time by trying to present people with facts, So when it does come to matters of publishing, though, again, you can be quite persuasive, especially on those topics where people aren't so rigidly dug in right now. But this can definitely encourage you, motivate you, give you some momentum toward publishing, but also to make your argument super well, to really get at the heart of a matter. So if you are a writer, I would actually be utilizing this transit toward that end, especially when it comes to the big picture stuff. Maybe leave the details for a little bit later when you're getting some nice Taurus transits. But if you want to hit on those abstract concepts and things like that this would be great for helping you to do that. Also, if you are interested in taking any classes, learning about any subject, things like that, this can motivate you quite a bit to that end as well. If you have trouble focusing, if you have attention issues, this should help a lot with that as well, and not losing yourself in details. Although this can rabbit hole a bit. That would be one area where attention could get diverted, is it getting hyper-focused on something else. So that is something to keep in mind. You may well find yourself in some interesting rabbit holes with this transit. Digging into things, really feeling super motivated to understand something really thoroughly. And it could be kind of anything. It could really just crop up like out of something you just happen upon, And then, yeah, other than all of that, that motivation is also really about expanding your horizons. That Mars, that arrow coming from that circle, it is wanting to reach out and bring something in that you haven't experienced before, that you don't yet see as a part of you, wanting to bring that into your realm of experience, your realm of understanding and knowledge. So there's a desire for personal expansion through the mind, through experience, through intellectual, spiritual inquiry, or like I said, traveling new places, taking in new cultures, new ideas, and things like that. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Pisces. So I hope that this Mars treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me.